Hello, this is Katie from Rust and Stardust Productions. I hope everybody's doing okay. We have been really busy working behind the scenes on lots of new ideas and projects that we hope to roll out as soon as lockdown is ended. So today I would like to introduce you to some more of our puppet family. Now you may have noticed in previous videos I've got this gorgeous creature lounging on the back of my chair. This is actually where I keep him, because I quite like having him on my armchair when I'm sitting in my sitting room by the fire. But he is not the first dragon I ever made, if I bring him up. Now this lovely creature is called Cecil, and he is part of some of our children's party shows. He features in 2 different shows, so he has had many adventures and been to lots of children's parties. As you can imagine, he's always very popular. Everybody loves a dragon. There's something so magical about them. And he is particularly gorgeous because of all of the blues. So we made him blue because his first story was under the sea, and so I wanted to make him extra special and mermaidy almost. So I've gone for all of these different scales, and if you look closely, all of his scales are painted different shades of blue and pearl, and there's lots of glitter on there too to make him extra sparkly. So even if we're in someone's sitting room, as long as the light hits him, he's going to be really sparkly. Now I've mentioned in previous videos that 4-legged creatures are quite difficult to, not necessarily to make, but they're difficult for one person to puppeteer. You've got to think about where you need to hold the puppet to get the nicest movement on stage. But if there's just one person, you've got to have a think about how that's going to work for one person. In the first show that he was in, he was underwater, so making him swim was really lovely. I put a little hook underneath his chin for the puppeteer to hold, so that you're not holding his head, because you don't want to cover up your lovely puppet. So the hook is there so that it doesn't cover up the puppet with your hand. And then I like to hold him just under his bottom, really, so that I can manipulate his tail. And because I've actually got really long fingers, I can work my hand up the tail and give it a bit extra movement. And you'll notice the end just moves freely, which adds a nice touch. So one person can use the head all the way through the body and the tail just to make these lovely undulating swimming movements. And Eleanor actually often uses this beautiful boy, and what she decided was really nice to do for her was to rest him on her forearm, manipulate his head with her hand, and just steady him with her other hand on his bottom. But the arm underneath just supports him really nicely, especially when she gets him to swim out over the audience. So we both puppeteer this dragon in the 2 different shows, and we each have our own style for making him move. I've used a couple of similar techniques to other puppets that I've shown you before. The head is a wooden egg as a base, and again with that hook in to hold. And then what I've done is I've used tin foil and Sculpey clay to sculpt his lovely face. And for his eyes, I've just used little beads and painted them with nail varnish. Now actually, I've used a lot of nail varnish on this dragon. It's really going to last a long time, and it has that beautiful sheen. And I, being the magpie hoarder that I am, every nail varnish anyone has ever given me, when one's come free with a magazine, I've kept it in a box, so I have pretty much every colour of nail varnish under the sun. And I had lots of blues and greens and shimmery ones, which were perfect for this dragon. Now when I showed you the tail earlier, you may recognise what I've made this out of. It makes a lovely little clicky noise. Now this is actually one of those toy wooden snakes that you might get at an old-fashioned toy shop. So I've used one of those for the core of the tail and the neck as well, because it just helped with that movement. And then what I did was I covered it over with some old foam. I think this actually was an old memory foam mattress that was being thrown away, so I used that to pad it out, and because it's foam, it bends with the snake in the middle of it. So I've done that on both the neck and the tail. And then what I've done is I've cut strips to make the scales and just layered those on the top. And I've kept them from being stuck down completely so that they also move and bend with the snake underneath. For his body, I've used just a scrap of balsa wood that I had. It was just a big lump of balsa wood. Now balsa wood's amazing because it's really soft, so you don't need to have any big scary tools to carve it. I just used a craft knife and some sandpaper, and I just carved it into my dragon body shape. Then I've covered it with my craft foam scales again. For the legs, because I knew that only one person would be puppeteering this, I wanted them to move on their own so that someone didn't have to manipulate them, and also I didn't want them just to be rigid so that his legs didn't really move. I thought as he swims, the legs are going to just move freely so that it looks as natural as possible, and still makes him look alive and like he's swimming through the water. To make them move, what I did was I drove a pen through the balsa wood. So as I said, balsa wood's really soft, and what I did is I got a biro pen that I didn't want anymore, and I took it apart, I took the ink out, so I was left with the plastic shell, which it's basically a plastic tube. And I got a hammer, pushed the end of the outer bit of the pen into the wood, and then I hammered it through so it went all the way through, and then I was able to put a stick through the centre of the plastic pen tube and stick my legs either side of that stick. So that stick's able to move and rotate inside our dragon. Then for his wings, I've used this beautiful iridescent acetate that I had and sandwiched it between two bits of foam. So it actually makes a crackly noise, but I quite like that. I don't really mind it because I don't mind if people can see how I've made it. I don't think that matters. I like the fact that I've made him basically out of scraps, because it's green, it's good for the environment. I haven't had to go out and buy anything, and everything has basically been upcycled that might have been thrown away. So I think instead of throwing something away, make a dragon. It's much better. So that is our lovely Cecil. So this chap, you'll notice there are lots of similarities, but there's also some big differences. So this dragon, I actually just made for fun. I wanted him to be part of my Halloween costume last year. I absolutely love dragons, and I'd always wanted to make one that I could wear. So this one, I've actually put ties on him so that it can drape around my neck, kind of like a scarf or a shawl or a stole, and then a bit like fairy wings that you might get in a fancy dress shop. Then just tie the ties under my arm so that he stays in place, and then he just becomes part of my amazing costume, like he's just my pet. And he's got a stick that slots into his head, so I can then make him come to life. And as I'm swanning around my Halloween party, he can just be looking around, checking out all of the other guests and seeing if there are any party nibbles that we can have. Now, I named him Aurum, which means gold in Latin, because I absolutely love gold. I've probably mentioned that in previous videos. I usually like to put a bit of gold on lots of my puppets. I'm a magpie. I really love things that are shiny, and especially gold. Maybe I'm a pirate, who knows. So Aurum is a little bit different to Cecil. So the first thing you probably notice is that his neck is different. I decided that this was the best way to make his articulated neck. Now, I discovered this way of making articulated parts on puppets when I did some work with an amazing puppet maker in London, and that really opened my eyes to the different ways that you can use foam and get different movements and articulation with things like long necks on anything, actually, anything that has a neck. This is a really good way of doing it. And so what I did was I've cut all of these discs out of foam and then threaded some cord right through the middle, but between each disc is a bead. So if you have a look, shiny little bead. Now this is just an old pearl necklace that I had in my craft box, and I've done a disc, then a bead, then a disc, then a bead, and if you do that all the way up, keeping them in the right order so that it tapers towards the head, that little bead gives you that extra bit of movement, so it gives you that amazing movement and articulation, which Cecil has, but it's not as good a movement. And also the snake, it clicks, and also the snake can only go like that, whereas this can go everywhere, so it gives you so much more 360-degree movement rather than just up and down like those toy snakes. So that's the first thing I changed. So the legs are sculpted into the curled up sort of crouching position because I knew I wanted Aurum to just sit on my shoulders. So I didn't want them to have the same wobbly movement that Cecil's legs did. So that's another difference for this particular puppet. And his body, I actually just used a scrap bit of foam and I just gave it a gentle curve so it's slightly banana shaped so that it could curve around the back of my neck rather than just being straight, because that wouldn't have been very comfortable for me to wear. But because it's just scrap bits of foam, it's really light and doesn't weigh my shoulders down when I wear him. Now, because I was experimenting, I knew that I really liked Cecil's design, but I wanted to see if there were any other ways I could take it. I actually used Warbler on his tummy, which is really hard. It's a thermoplastic, which comes in a sheet. You cut it into the shape you want, heat it with a heat gun or hairdryer, and then you can bend it into the shape that you want. So it's absolutely amazing tool. And as far as I'm aware, it's eco-friendly, it's non-toxic, so it's a really brilliant material. I used Warbler all over the tummy because I thought it should probably be quite hard wearing. I did then realise that actually, even though it's great, I thought foam would be better, like Cecil's tummy, just because it's lighter, it's softer, that feels a bit nicer on your skin. Also, having to heat up every single bit of thermoplastic, bend it into shape, it was taking a really long time. Now I actually carried on with the thermoplastic on his scales here, doing each individual scale, heating it up, placing it on, and I thought, you know what, that is going to take me forever. So, plan B, I thought I would use foam instead. So Warbler was great. Warbler, it means it's really tough, it's really hard, that's going to last forever, but I didn't want to be here making him for an eternity. I wanted him to be ready for Halloween. So I got a little circular hole punch and I punched out individual circles out of my scraps of craft foam and glued them on. And still fairly time consuming because he's a big chap, but much quicker than the Warbler. The wings are made in exactly the same way as Cecil's. I just made these ones a little bit more epic, a little bit bigger. They still make that crunchy noise. I know there's a better way of making the wings, but I didn't have time because Halloween was drawing closer. Plus I do really love the look of this iridescent acetate, so I didn't really mind. And now Aurum's face is very different to Cecil's. If I hold them up so you can see. So they're very different in style. Cecil is for a children's show. He's really sweet and playful. I wanted him to not be scary for children's parties, obviously. I didn't want Aurum to be scary, but I did want to try a more realistic look. I've always felt like Cecil was missing something. His head's very flat, so from this angle you don't get much information compared to Aurum. His eyes are higher up and he has horns, so it means rather than having to always make sure Cecil's looking down so you can see his eyes, Aurum's eyes are placed so that he doesn't need to be looking down, he can look straight at an audience. So that was quite a big thing in the design there. And yeah, the horns, bigger ears, bigger nostrils, everything's just a bit bigger and slightly more realistic looking. Now these are actually glass dragon eyes. I found a multi-pack online of dragon eyes. I thought, I need those in my kit anyway, because who doesn't need a jar full of dragon eyes? And these were just the most beautiful colour, these ones. Now his head is made out of that Warbler thermoplastic. So that is such a good material. Sculpey, which is what I made Cecil's head out of, is fantastic to sculpt. If anyone's ever sculpted with Sculpey before, it is a dream to sculpt. It's so soft and easy to use with tools or just your fingers. So that is why I love using it, but it's really brittle. So Cecil's ears have got wire in them, but they could still very easily crack if you dropped him on the floor. He's very vulnerable. This, I could chuck him off a cliff and he wouldn't break. And so I built up his head just using my scraps. And then with my sculpting tools, I made all the little scale marks in there and his little teeth. So his whole head is a foil base with the warbler on top, and I'm really thrilled with it. It just has worked so nicely. So I don't prefer sculpting with warbler, but the end result is great, and it's a lot safer. If a puppet was ever to fall over, you would know that it would be okay. So future puppets, especially with sticky outy bits, will probably be warbler. And then his paint job, it was similar to Cecil. I started with a base coat of black, and then I went in and dry brushed and sponged with gold. Obviously, gold is the best. And then I went in again with some nail varnish. Now, I was wearing a deep red dress for Halloween, and so I wanted to have a few reddish, purplish tones on here because I thought they looked really beautiful with the gold. So I've just gone in and just gone on individual scales with different hues of reds and purples, and the end result, hopefully you'll agree, is really beautiful and magical. So I'm really pleased I got to introduce you to my dragons today. I absolutely love these guys. I think I say every puppet is one of my favourites, but these truly are some of my favourites. So hopefully this has given you some good ideas and inspiration maybe to make your own dragons. I make most of my things just out of scraps and found objects and upcycled things. So have a look around your recycling bins, your old jewellery, see what makes you think of a nice shiny dragon and get making. And please do share your creations and questions, anything with us. If you tag us in your work, we'll feature you in our stories. We love to look at what you've been making. Everybody please keep looking after yourselves, stay safe, be kind to each other, and we'll see you in our next video. Bye!